Well, welcome everyone. This is a 5-week course entitled Better Together, Finding Communication Through Better Communication. Finding Connection Through Better Communication. And in this initial talk, I'm going to just introduce kind of an overview of some research on the topic. And as I go through the course, we'll be delving into each one of the sections that I'm talking about in a great deal more detail. So in this opening session then, I'd like to introduce you to a body of research which has shown some really exciting and interesting things about marriage and highlight some ideas from that we'll go into in a great deal more detail. So I think each one of us, as we enter into marriage, we want to have a kind of fairy tale marriage, a happily ever after. The thing is that, do we really know what this looks like or how to achieve it? I know that couples do take some marriage formation before they begin marriage, but is that enough to really give us the skills that we need to find a happier marriage? So hopefully this 5-week course will introduce us to some new skills and understandings about each other that will enable us to pursue a happier marriage together. So first of all, if we want to have a better marriage, how do we know what we should listen to? We might hear some advice and it sounds good. Should we follow it? We might read some research on marriage, but how valid is that research? And even if there's recommendations for behavior, are these doable recommendations? Sometimes there's been things that researchers have told couples they should do that turned out to be nearly impossible. So what makes a better marriage? I'd like to introduce you to some highly empirical research on marriage, but the cool thing is that the information that came back from this marriage is highly doable and very intuitive. So most people hear this and say, you know, this makes sense just at an intuitive level. Furthermore, this research parallels the church's understanding of marriage on the level of virtue, that certain behaviors lead to happiness. It parallels that. And also, when we look in sacred scripture, we find that the recommendations parallel things that we find in scripture. So although this isn't a course on the Bible or Catholic doctrine, everything that I'm going to be highlighting from this positive psychology relates completely to our faith and is totally compatible. Now, in order to do this, I want to introduce you to some researchers who did some highly empirical research on marriage. A number of years ago, I was thinking about doing some intermittent fasting. So I went on a government website and I looked at studies on intermittent fasting, and I found out that based on research, intermittent fasting is very good for rats. But there were almost no human trials. So it is likely that the research from rats does parallel and connect with humans, but we haven't done the research necessary to figure out if that's really true. So the good news is the research that I'm sharing with you is based on human trials with couples and is extremely, extremely empirical. So the researchers I'm going to highlight are Dr. John and Dr. Julie Gottman, the founders of the Gottman Institute. Now, Dr. Gottman began his work as a mathematician with an undergraduate degree in mathematics at MIT. And that background generally does not seem like it would be the kind of background that would lead to him going into this kind of research. But he went on to do a PhD in research psychology, and his idea was that he wanted to use very empirical methods. He wanted math. He wanted highly observable things that he could benchmark as being scientific, and apply this to the study of couples. So he created a laboratory. He put couples in the laboratory and he studied them. Now, on the surface, that sounds really weird. When we hear the word laboratory, we often think of beakers and people in white lab coats and so forth. But what he actually did was a little bit different. So he created something that was later dubbed the Love Lab. And it was basically a comfortable apartment near the University of Washington. And they would put couples in this laboratory for the entire weekend. So it was a kind of natural environment. Now, how rigorous was the study? I don't want to spend too much time, but I want to convince you that he has gone above and beyond in how he conducted this research. He followed more than 3,000 couples for 40 years. Now, I think this is an old count. The later count I've heard is 3,400 couples. The couples were observed in this laboratory apartment that resembled a normal apartment situation, and they were asked to engage in certain kinds of conversations. They were asked to have some conflict discussions, deliberately discussing a topic of ongoing disagreement between the couple. And they were also asked to recall how they met and talk about their shared goals or discuss pleasant memories that they had together. So the conversations over the weekend were then, basically there were videos throughout the entire apartment except in the bedroom and the bathroom. And the footage was taken and transcribed so that every word they said to each other was transcribed. And then they would analyze this footage and track emotional expressions, facial micro-expressions. They were actually pioneers in coding emotions on people's faces. They looked at body language, tone of voice, verbal content, and perhaps a little less naturally, they did hook people up to monitors. They measured heart rate, blood pressure, skin conductance or sweat response, facial muscle tension, and this allowed the researchers to detect stress, emotional arousal, signs of physiological flooding, where one or the other partner became emotionally overwhelmed during these conversations. They developed their own behavioral coding systems. Eventually, today, they would put people in front of cameras and computer AI would code all this for them. But initially, this was done observationally with assistants, otherwise known as grad students. They looked for positive behaviors, expressions of affection, humor, interest, validation of other partner's point of view, and they observed 4 negative behaviors that we will look at in some detail: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. They also looked for repair attempts in conflict, efforts to de-escalate the conflict, making a joke, replying with a soft statement, validating something the other person said. They also had the couples complete detailed surveys about their relationship satisfaction, history, conflict style, friendship, intimacy, shared values. And this observational data was correlated with their subjective experience as a couple. In early studies, they had a key longitudinal study that followed 130 newlywed couples for 6 years. And after analyzing just 15 minutes of a conflict discussion, they were able to analyze and predict which couples would get divorced of the couples that came into the lab. And by the way, this was a small cohort of couples that they observed. Initially, they released the data and said that with 95% accuracy, if a couple would spend a weekend in their lab and they could analyze a conflict discussion, they could predict with 95% accuracy whether the couple would be divorced within 6 years. Over time, they became a little more humble, and now they say 90%. In another study, They followed 700 couples for 12 years, and they were looking at emotional disengagement. And among these couples, this was another window for divorce in about, I think, 19 years. So if I asked you a question, if a couple was experiencing distress and difficulty in the early years of their marriage, how long would the average couple in distress wait for asking for help? So think of a couple, they've just been married, but it's not going well and they're having difficulty. How long do you think the average couple would wait before they tried to get help? Think about that for a second, and when you have a number in your mind, I'll tell you what their research found. So they found that the average couple in distress would get divorced in 5.6 years. And these other couples having longer-term problems with a lack of positive effect, emotional disengagement, would get divorced in about 16.2 years. But in this first group, the typical couple would wait 6 years before they would seek help. Now, what does that tell you? None of the couples in this original smaller cohort that were having difficulty got any help at all. Now, especially among these couples in distress, this small cohort, Gottman was able to identify 4 negative behaviors that these couples had, certain communication patterns, and he gave them the name after the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So he called them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse after this painting by Albrecht Dürer. So what are the 4 horsemen? These are 4 negative behavior patterns. 1, criticism, attacking a partner's character rather than addressing specific behaviors. 2, contempt, exhibiting disdain or superiority, often through sarcasm or mocking. The visual for this would probably be eye rolling. Defensiveness, responding to complaints with counter-complaints or playing the victim. And finally, the one that's not as intuitive, stonewalling, withdrawing from interaction, shutting down, and refusing to engage. So the handout on the right is from the Gottman Institute, and that will be part of the course materials here. So I'm going to go through each of these behaviors. This is just an overview slide of the first behavior of the negative pattern of criticism. So criticism is attacking your partner's character or personality, such as, "You never think about me, you're so selfish." Now let me make up a silly example. Let's say we have a couple, Tom and Mary, and Tom has just arrived home from work, and the very first thing that Mary says to him when he walks in the door is, "Tom, you are such a slob. You left your socks all over the bedroom floor. I'm so upset with you." So that would be an example of criticism. And if you think about it, if that is the very first thing that Tom hears when he walks in the door, what would you predict the following conversation would sound like? So Gottman did, even though these couples had these behaviors and ended up getting divorced, he didn't want to leave them here. He wanted to create an antidote for each one of these behaviors. So for criticism, his antidote was a gentle startup. So he discovered that 95% of the time, the way that a conversation begins determines how it's going to end. Now, the little example of a criticism that I gave you is actually a very mild one. I could ramp it up a little bit, and I could say, "Tom, there must be something wrong with you. You are such a slob. You never pick up your socks." So criticisms can go up, 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 or they can be mild. But you get the idea. So the antidote, and we're going to go into this in a lot of detail later, is to use I statements and focus on expressing your feelings and needs without blame. So perhaps Mary says, it's been a really difficult work week and I'm really stressed out, and seeing all your socks on the floor is causing me to be more stressed. Do you think you could help me pick them up? Now, if you go from the worst criticism I gave to that statement, and then you kind of predict how is Tom going to respond, likely Tom is going to give a much nicer response, and the evening is going to go a lot better. Another example, I feel hurt when you leave dishes in the sink. I'd really appreciate it if you could help me clean the kitchen. And I wanted to point out, as I said, underlying all of this, it matches very clearly with our Christian tradition. So, in fact, in ancient Hebrew culture, there's a book of the Bible called Proverbs, which is short, little, pithy sayings, for advice for a person as they grow up. And here's a proverb: a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. I think that is exactly a soft startup. All right. A further behavior, if this incident that I relayed happened, and he received a very harsh criticism when he walked in the door, the natural response of most people to a harsh criticism is to get defensive. So being defensive is refusing to take responsibility, making excuses, or a counterattack. It's not my fault. You never reminded me. Or in the case of the socks, perhaps Tom would say, oh yeah? Well, I saw your bra on the floor in the bathroom this morning. Okay, so Tom takes no responsibility for his socks, and he says, you're just as bad as me, you left your bra on the floor. The antidote is to take responsibility for our part in the conflict. So even if a conflict blows up and you think your partner is like 90% to blame, maybe poor old Tom has a sense of humor and he makes a joke about Mary's mother, and Mary is upset. How dare you say that about my mother? And she's all upset that he said this. Well, as the conflict is going along, Mary could look at that and say, Tom is almost, in her mind, 100% at fault. But she could say, well, when you said that, I got really upset and I said some things that I regret. So she could take responsibility for her, whatever she thinks it is, 10%. And by doing so, it helps the other person to take responsibility. So if Mary, in response to the thing about the bra, she goes in the bathroom, picks up the bra, puts it in the hamper, says, yeah, you're right, I should have put that away. Tom goes in to change after work. He looks around the bedroom and he goes, wow, there's a lot of socks on the floor in here. It is very possible that he will come around and say, pick up his socks and then come out and say, yeah, you're right, I shouldn't leave my socks all over the place. So we acknowledge our role in the issue, even if it's small, how it sounds. You're right, I should have remembered. I'll set a reminder next time if perhaps he forgot to do something he said he was going to do. So owning our part de-escalates the conflict and encourages cooperation with the couple. Some Bible verses, again, just to show that each one of these things is something that is addressed in our Christian tradition. Ephesians 4:25, therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth to his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Or confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. Or, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest on me. So the Bible doesn't actually command us to be vulnerable, but if we read the Bible carefully, we can see that it clearly teaches us and models vulnerability as a virtue. So vulnerability is a strength and not a weakness. Scripture encourages us to be honest about our weaknesses, to confess our sins, to share our struggles, to depend on God and others, and to live with humility and openness with one another. So being defensive is the wrong approach from our tradition. A fourth negative behavior is called stonewalling. This one isn't really as intuitive to us. This is just my overview slide. But it is to withdraw from interaction, shutting down, refusing to engage, often in response to feeling overwhelmed. So remember that these couples are in an apartment and there's cameras everywhere. The cameras are rolling. So they would take what's usually a guy who was doing this, and they would put him in front of the video footage and they would say, "Tell me what you were thinking when you shut down right here." And very often the guy would say, "Well, I was actually feeling overwhelmed with emotion, and I didn't want to say anything stupid or do anything stupid, so I decided the best thing, the safest thing to do would just to be very quiet in this moment." And when we hear that, we might think, well, maybe this isn't a negative behavior at all. I mean, after all, it's better than, blowing up and launching into saying things that he'll regret. But remember, the cameras are rolling, and usually the wife, the camera pans back to the wife's response to the husband shutting down, not saying anything, becoming quiet, and her emotional state is just going up and up and up. "I asked you a question. Why aren't you answering me? Why are you being quiet?" And so the researchers made a game show sound, a big red X, bzzzt. Clearly this behavior is not a good behavior at all. And so they wanted to find some kind of solution. So what's the antidote? Well, the antidote is for that person who's become overwhelmed with emotion, and it's very likely that both of them are overwhelmed with emotion, they suggest that you take a break and calm down before re-engaging in a healthy way. Now, if you have gotten overwhelmed with emotion, your body is actually flooded with a stress hormone, cortisol, and it can take varying times, but generally it takes about 20 minutes for you to calm down. So they suggest that the couple, first of all, that the husband might say to the wife, "Hey," if he was a Renaissance man, he'd say, "I'm feeling overwhelmed with emotion." But he might just say, "Can we just take a break?" And typically the wife would look at him and say, "That's an emotionally intelligent thing to say. I'm kind of getting upset too. Yes, let's take a break." So maybe the wife would, in this apartment, go to the bathroom where there's no cameras, and she would run a bubble bath and listen to some nice, relaxing Norwegian heavy metal music. And the husband, I can't really predict what a man would do to relax. It could be a whole variety of things. Maybe he'd take the dog for a walk, go for a run, go shoot ducks, ride a motorcycle. But whatever a guy does, he would go away, do something that is emotionally self-soothing, relaxing. And then after 20 minutes, they would ask the couple to come back together, and they would specifically ask the person who had shut down with stonewalling to share what they were feeling when this took place. And again, back to my silly beginning example with Mary and Tom, maybe Tom would say, "Well, actually, I was feeling really underappreciated because I didn't have to wake up early this morning for work, but I woke up early, I made you breakfast, I spent time with you," and he's a Renaissance man, so I did the dishes, I got dinner ready, I don't know, I vacuumed the living room, whatever, and then I went off to work. And the very first thing you said to me when I walked in the door was, "You are such a slob, there must be something wrong with you." And I just felt really underappreciated. Now, truthfully, any woman who heard that statement would immediately feel bad. I don't want you to feel underappreciated. And then because she's a woman, without even blinking, she would tell Tom 3 things that she appreciated about him, just like that, bam, bam, bam. And if this actually took place, the conflict would end, and they would actually feel a sense of closeness as a couple, because Tom has just shared something from his heart about how he feels, and this would be at least the beginning of a resolution here. So that's basically how it works. When you're flooded with emotion, very often people can't communicate or communicate effectively, and you need to take time to calm down. Now, if you've been paying attention, I skipped one of the 4 horsemen. I put them out of order, and I did that on purpose. So now we have contempt. And this is my overview slide, but we're going to look at it. So the definition is speaking down to your partner with sarcasm, ridicule, name-calling, eye-rolling, or mockery. And it usually conveys a sense of disgust and superiority. So actually, as I was sharing those criticisms, when I got all the way up to, there must be something wrong with you, you're such a slob, you never pick up your socks, that's actually contempt. That's no longer criticism. It's gone over the line. Now, again, contempt happens when we don't engage in emotional self-regulation during a conflict, and Scripture tells us that we should do this. Let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. And St. Paul says, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. Again, we're going to loop back to this in the later lectures here, but anger is simply an emotion. So we don't go, bless me, Father, I was angry. And then what happened? Okay, so simply being angry is an emotion. So let's look here. Contempt is sarcasm, mockery. The visual is very often eye-rolling. The antidote is not as simple as the others. So for criticism, it was a soft startup. For defensiveness, take responsibility. For stonewalling, it was take a break. Unfortunately, there is no quick answer for contempt. It requires you to build a culture of appreciation and respect. So it requires a more global solution in the relationship. So what do? You need to express gratitude, admiration, respect for your partner. Basically, they need appreciation and affection from you. So it might sound like this: I really appreciate how hard you work for our family. Thank you for making dinner tonight. So we need a lot of those in order to extinguish contempt. Contempt is the most dangerous of these 4. The antidote is not as simple, but practicing kindness and admiration, and not just in moments of conflict. I think we have to be honest and say that contempt is always sinful. So whereas being angry is not confessable, treating someone with contempt is. The Bible urges us in conflict to act with humility, gentleness, honesty, forgiveness, and urgency in trying to solve the conflict. So Scripture tells us that we need to seek to restore relationship and reflect the grace of Christ in how we treat each other. So for example, Paul gives this global advice: do nothing from selfishness or conceit, but in humility count others better than yourselves. Let each of you look not to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Have this in mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ. So I'd like to talk a bit more about contempt. If I was very scientific and I got a graduated cylinder and I put a glass on a table and I convinced you that I had filled a glass exactly to the middle. And then I asked you this question: is the glass half empty, or is the glass half full? So pause for a minute and think of how you would answer that question. Is the glass half empty? Is the glass half full? Now, many people, because they sort of intuitively think they should have a positive attitude, will tell you, well, the glass is half full. And that might actually be their attitude towards life. Someone else might be honest and say, well, sometimes I always see the glass as half full. So you can see the two sides of this. Now, a clever answer might be, and some people have said this to me, it's both. Now, what do they mean? I'll give an example here. Let's say that my friend Tom is going out and he cuts the grass, and they have an enormous yard. And it's 95 degrees out, but it's Saturday and it's the only day he has to cut the lawn. So he goes out, he cuts the lawn, he comes in the house, he is baked. He's just sweating and it's really hot. So first he drinks some water and something to restore his electrolytes, but he thinks, I really feel like having a beer. And he goes to the fridge and he looks in the fridge, and there is one beer left in the fridge, just one. And he's still really thirsty. So he pours that beer and he drinks half of it. And then he looks at that beer and he says, oh, dang, I already drank half of the last beer in the fridge. Or he says, look at that, I still have half a beer. Now, if you think about it, has anything changed about that glass of beer? Nothing has changed. What is different between those two statements? It has to do with how he perceives it. Is his mental attitude towards the glass? And this is my point. So it turns out that contempt only occurs when we see the glass as half empty. Now, this is just an analogy, but imagine that inside your brain, you store your memory in little compartments. It's like a little shelving unit or something, and each little compartment stores a memory. And let's say that you've spent a lot of time being very negative, and you've had conflict, and things are not going well. So when you see your wife, and you go to think about her in your brain, and you access your stored memories, you're going to be pulling off a lot of negative memories out of what you've stored there. On the other side, if you've been working on building the positive and your relationship is very positive, when you think about your wife and you go to those storage of your memories of her, it's very likely that you'll pull a happy, good memory. So contempt only happens when we overload the negative memories in our mind. Now, the good news is that our mind is very flexible and plastic. So if we've gotten a situation where a lot of negative memories have built up, we can work to replace those memories by doing positive things, finding positive ways to be able to fill that up. And it's only when we've allowed ourselves to go into the negative that contempt comes out. So I told you that these couples in distress had 4 negative behaviors, and so it turns out that I have all 4 of these same negative behaviors in my own marriage, and I've been married almost 40 years. So how is that possible? Well, it turns out that these are actually behaviors that we see in every single marriage. All these same behaviors occur in every marriage. And the difference between the marriage in distress and the happy couples that stayed married for 40 years, as Gottman observed them, was actually the ratio of positive to negative behaviors. So in happy couples, for every negative interaction in conflict, there was at least 5 positives. So as these grad students were reviewing the tapes, watching a couple, it'd be positive, 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 negative. Now, in the couples in distress, believe it or not, it was 0.8 positive for every negative. So the researchers didn't have to be a genius to see we got a problem here. Something's not working right. So what do we want to do? He calls this the magic 5-to-1 ratio. In order to be happy in our marriage, we want to maintain a 5-to-1 ratio, not only in conflict, but during our whole relationship with our spouse. And things don't always go well. Of course, in any relationship, there's give and take, and times it doesn't go well. Maybe you're stressed out, you're tired, difficult things are happening in your life. But when we sense that things aren't going well, then the intervention would be, I need to put more positives. I'm going to deliberately try to have an intervention here where I put more positives in. Interactions might be showing interest or curiosity in our spouse. They might be expressions of affection. They might be empathy or understanding, trying to understand their point of view. Smiling, touching, making eye contact, humor or light teasing. Humor is actually a tricky thing. It can be really good and a positive behavior, but it's sometimes helpful to, if we're someone who engages in a lot of sarcasm or humor like that, just to ask our spouse, does my humor ever hurt your feelings? Do I ever get hurt when I'm teasing or being like this? You might have two people that enjoy it and they just go at it and it sounds awful, but they love it. Or you might have a couple where one person's very sensitive and they really can't tolerate any kind of humor like this. Saying thank you and I appreciate you. Very often, once we're married, it's easy to get so casual in the relationship that we're actually treating our spouse less politely and less appreciative than we would be if we were visiting someone else or if we had a guest in our home. So it's a good idea to just try to maintain that very positive approach. Negative interactions, again, obviously criticism, contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling, and sarcasm, irritation, dismissiveness. These are negative kinds of things that can creep into a relationship. Why does the 5-to-1 ratio matter? Well, it turns out that our brain is much more sensitive to negative interactions than to positive. And what does this mean? Well, if you launch a negative criticism, your brain will remember that event far more than it will remember thank you, I appreciate you, things like that. And the 5-to-1 ratio exists because in order to counterbalance what our brain hears, we need a lot more positives to erase the negatives. So negatives are not that easy to erase from our brain. They also found in this research that there was a lot of predictive power in this from the research. Couples that maintained the 5-to-1 ratio were far more likely to stay together as a couple. And then as the ratio dropped, things in the relationship tends to deteriorate. Of course, this applies beyond conflict, but it's especially important in conflict. But it's a global thing that has to be happening in someone's entire relationship. Now, feeding off of this, Gottman came up with something called the emotional bank account. We need to fill up the emotional bank with positive interactions, kindness, appreciation, affection, support, and these are like deposits in the account. Maybe you own a house and you're looking at your dishwasher thinking, I don't know, it's making funny noises, it doesn't seem to be working very well. We need to plan and start saving so that when this thing eventually gives up in 6 months, we're ready for that big expenditure. We need to buy a new dishwasher. So the same thing occurs in your emotional relationship with your spouse. You're filling up the account with all these positives. And going back to that other little story I told, what if Tom makes a joke about Mary's mother and she gets upset? If the emotional bank account is really full, then she will get less angry at him, less upset with him, and she will recover quicker from this fault. So we want to avoid the negative interactions and we want to build the positive. When the balance is high, the relationship becomes resilient, and when it's low or overdrawn, even minor issues can become overwhelming. So we need to practice daily acts of appreciation, express empathy in conflict, engage in rituals of connection, goodbye kisses, shared meals, date nights, things like that. And we need to try to keep our promises and follow through on things. This is building trust. We also need to be emotionally available and responsive to our spouse. So the big idea is very simple: increase positive interactions, limit negative interactions, and try to build this up. Now, to begin with here, we had the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. That's very negative. I'd like to flip this now and talk about the positive side of Gottman's research. And in order to illustrate this, he has created a little infographic called the Sound Relationship House. Now, I want to be honest. When I first saw this, I thought, oh man, look at this house and these things on here, and especially look at the first thing at the bottom, building love maps. Does this really sound kind of hokey? Well, again, I want to emphasize this is based on a massive, massive research database of highly empirical research. So, for example, trust on the chart. Gottman's research book on trust is about this thick. Okay, so every single point on this chart is based on massive research, but he's tried to put it in an understandable kind of illustration that can help us to hang on to these points. So we have a house, and it has 7 levels and 2 walls. The 2 most important things based on Gottman's research in every relationship are trust and commitment. And as it turns out, trust and commitment build up slowly over time. As your partner demonstrates trustworthiness to you, your trust goes up. So these are things that should be building, please God, over 40 or 50 years of your relationship together. So we're slowly working on these things. Now, how do we put wheels on this and build this up? Well, these are the different floors, the 7 floors or levels to Gottman's house. Trust, believing your partner has best interests in mind. Without trust, a sense of emotional safety is lost. Trust grows through consistent, positive interactions and mutual care for one another. So in order to build trust, we really need to be an open book, very transparent with our partner. So for example, Tom has a business luncheon and he tells his wife, oh yeah, I had lunch with Jane today. Well, if she's interested and wants to know about it, well, tell me more about this Jane, and where did you go, and what was happening? So we need to be very transparent about our life if we want to facilitate trust. Commitment, choosing to cherish and maintain the relationship even during hard times. So we need to be committed to continuing to be a team, to working together, and to do those behaviors that highlight this. It matters because commitment helps couples to weather conflicts, to demonstrate that their partner is a priority in their life, rather than maintaining alternatives. Okay, now This is the most hokey sounding one, building love maps. What does Gottman mean by this? Well, let's imagine, and it might not be true of you, but let's imagine that you and your spouse decide we're going to take up dancing. We're going to learn to do some kind of couple dancing, ballroom dancing, country western, two-step, whatever you're going to do, but you're going to learn to dance together to music. Now, the first time that you step out on the dance floor, it's going to be very awkward. You've just learned how to do this. You're not used to dancing together. Oh my gosh, I'm going to step on her feet. How's this going to work? But if you had been committed to dancing and every Thursday night for 40 years you went dancing, and I saw you 40 years later dancing on the dance floor, you wouldn't even be thinking about it. It would be fluid motion. You would know each other, you would feel comfortable, it would just be something that you didn't think about. So his idea of the love map is you need to learn everything possible about your spouse. All right, so poor old Tom is going to put on his love map, never make jokes about her mother. It's on his love map. That road is closed. If this is his GPS, that street is blocked. Do not go down that street. Now perhaps, and it depends on his wife, but perhaps one day he spontaneously brings home a rose and gives it to her for no reason at all. And she lights up like a light bulb. Oh, he says, she really likes that. It goes on his love map. Even the conflicts they have a conflict. Well, if we can learn from the conflict, then we become better at navigating our life together with our spouse. So what we're trying to do here is just get to know our spouse at a very, very deep level so that we can interact together in a very fluid, natural way and understand each other at a deep level. Now, I have a funny story, and my wife gave me permission to share it, but after about 35 years of marriage, my wife had the idea that I did not like apple pie and I loved cherry pie. And to be honest, if you put an apple and a cherry pie on the table, I'd look at the two of them and go, that one looks better. I had absolutely no preference whatsoever. Now, maybe in my 20s, I had a very strong opinion about pie, but I don't remember. But just a warning that as we continue to live and love our spouse, we need to keep revising our map. We need to keep allowing them to grow and change and figure out where they are right now in the moment. So this is an ongoing process. How do we do it? We ask them questions, we stay curious, we regularly update our knowledge of our partner, and this forms a foundation of emotional intimacy and understanding between the couple. Then shared fondness and admiration. So what does this look like? It is expressing appreciation, respect, and affection. A number of years ago, a counselor gave me a couple exercise. And when I first heard the exercise, I thought, oh, I don't know, that sounds kind of corny. I'm a guy after all. And the exercise was that each day you would take some time and you would share one thing that you appreciated about your spouse. Now, I want to warn you that based on brain research, women think much faster than men, and they may actually be more intelligent, certainly more emotionally intelligent. And so if you ask a woman to share something she appreciates about her spouse, no big deal. She can do it anytime, anywhere. When you ask a man, there's a guy rule to this exercise. Wives, you need to say, you know that appreciation thing we were going to do? Could you tell me when you're ready, or could we do it after dinner? Just give him some time for his poor, slow male brain to be able to come up with something. He'll come up with something really, really good, but he needs time to think before he's able to do it. Now, when I first heard about this exercise, I was a little skeptical, and then I tried it. And I have to say, it is either the first or the second most powerful thing I've ever done. This is an amazing thing to do as a couple. Now, even if you're doing this, of course, life will get busy, you'll forget to do it, and maybe you feel like the balance between the positive and the negative is beginning to get a little out of whack again. And you might say, I think we need to do that appreciation exercise again. So just an idea. But there's many things that you can do to show affection, appreciation. One thing, if I was a doctor, I would write a little script for all the men here, and it might say, you need to give your wife 8 30-second hugs every day if she'll let you. All right? What happens in a 30-second hug? There's actually a release of and I'm summarizing, there's other hormones involved, I'm sure, but the hormone oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone. It's the same hormone that bonds a mother and a child when a mother is nursing a child or holding an infant child. But they've discovered that the same thing happens in adult relationships. So giving a hug, giving a 30-second hug, is a profound way to put a positive into the relationship. Now, I purposely made this number very high. If you think about this, in the midst of busy life, you wake up in the morning, you give your wife a hug. Before breakfast, you give her a hug. On the way outdoor, you give her a hug. You've only made 3 hugs, all right? So I realize that 8 is a high number, but if I told you to give 1 hug a day, you might forget. If I tell you to give 8, hopefully she'll get a few. So, in all of this, you're trying to verbally or in other ways acknowledge and value your partner, express gratitude, and this is a very powerful antidote to contempt and fosters this culture of appreciation. Another thing they discovered as they were endlessly observing couples is that during a typical time together, each partner would make what Gottman calls a bid for connection. So maybe Mary says, "Oh, did I tell you about Rowena at work?" What does Mary want? Well, Mary wants Tom to stop and look at her and say, "Oh, what happened with Rowena?" So it's just the idea that the other person is asking for your attention, and you turn to that person and you let them tell you whatever it is they're about to tell you. If you think about that, it's not really very difficult, but the enemy in this is often a world full of screens. So perhaps we have a game on the TV, or we're on our phone, we're scrolling, or maybe we brought work home and we're typing away on a computer. But those kinds of other things in our life can distract us from focusing on our partner, turning towards them, and connecting with them. And I don't really know the number, but let's say during a typical evening, each person might make 8 bids for connection. If it was a bad evening and the husband missed every single one of these bids for connection, or the wife did, the person at the end of the night is going to feel very disconnected and distant from their husband. If, on the other hand, nobody's perfect, but you perhaps connected 6 times out of 8 or 7 times out of 8, the other person is going to feel very connected. Now, there was some research that I read, I don't remember the footnote, and it's probably not as rigorous as Gottman's research, but they asked married women about their lives with their husbands, and these were unhappy women, and they said, "My husband only gives me a hug when he's trying to initiate intimacy." And obviously they were indicating that this bid for intimacy did not go very well. Now, the truth is that the conversation around initiating intimacy in marriage is one of the most difficult ones that we can have. And very often couples experience that difficulty going on for 40, 50 years. But if you think about your happiness, everything that I've been telling you about building up appreciation, paying attention, turning toward instead of away, would have been the antidote to these wives who said, my husband only gives me a hug when he's trying to initiate intimacy. All of this, of course, is building up the emotional bank account, strengthening trust and connection. All of this, of course, is building the positive perspective, the 5-to-1 ratio, trying to keep that built up. So we want to have memories in our mind of our spouse that are positive, and we want to have a sense of goodwill and positivity in the relationship. So it naturally arises when the lower three levels are strong: love maps, fondness, turning toward, and the purpose encourages forgiveness, humor, and the constructive handling of conflict. And again, we're going to go into a lot more detail as we go along. Okay, managing conflict. So handling disagreements in a healthy, respectful way. Conflict is inevitable. We're going to have conflict. How we manage the conflict is the important thing to focus on, so that it becomes something that we can build on and leads to something positive instead of something destructive. Some key components would be all the antidotes we've talked about, but using soft startups when we're trying to bring up issues, accepting influence from our partner, and we'll talk lots more about that, making repair attempts, trying to de-escalate and self-soothe if we become overwhelmed with emotion, and focusing on solvable versus perpetual problems. And again, lots more detail to come. And this keeps our disagreements from damaging the relationship. Make life dreams come true. So perhaps in my father's generation, I'm not sure that women really were allowed to have dreams. Their dream was to support their husband's dream, but they didn't really have a dream of their own. In our modern world, both men and women have dreams that they're pursuing. And so in order to support your spouse's dreams, first of all, you have to know what the dream is. So you have to know your spouse well enough to know what their dreams are. And your job is to be the greatest fan of your spouse's dreams. Help them to achieve it. So you're there. You got this. I'm encouraging you. So lots of dialogue about each other's aspirations, offering support to help them to reach their dreams. Sometimes there has to be a compromise. Well, why don't you pursue this for a while, and then when you've done that, I'll pursue something that I want to do. But we're there, very knowledgeable and working with our spouse to help each person achieve the dreams that they have. Purpose of this is to build connection and a sense of shared meaning in the relationship. And that's our next level, creating shared meaning. So there's a story told about a couple that had been married for 40 years, but had spiraled into an extremely negative kind of relationship. And finally, after 40 years, they went to a counselor, and the counselor asked them a very simple opening question: tell me how you first met. And immediately the wife lights up and she says, oh, he was such a jerk. And she goes through this list of negative things about the husband. And then he responds in kind, and he lights up and he does the same thing back. And the counselor's thinking to themselves, how did this couple ever get past their first date? You know, if this is really, truly what happened. And the reality is, this is not at all how the couple first met. But they have become so focused on negative that when they go to their memories about their spouse, all they can pull out is negative memories, negative, negative, negative. So it's very, very important to continue to build a life together with shared values, rituals, goals, legacies. So date nights, celebrating things like birthdays, family vacations, family celebrations together. We want you to You could imagine an older couple saying, "Oh, you don't have to celebrate my birthday. I'm not celebrating anymore." Instead, we want you to be able to say, "Well, remember on your birthday last year, we went to that really cool restaurant and you had, I don't know, octopus salad, and then we went and did this fun thing and stayed in a hotel for the weekend." These are all rituals that have developed positive relationship between the two of you. And so things like having a regular date night and so forth. And all the things that we do with our family, really this is also building positive memories and connection for your entire family, your children, and so forth. So we don't want to let go of this. We want to keep building a shared sense of meaning. It adds richness and depth to the relationship. It binds the partners together. And since this is actually the roof of the house, Gottman is going to say that this will build resilience in the relationship. So you might go for 20 years and everything's great and there's no problems, and then there's a serious illness or a death in the family, or you lose your job, or something traumatic happens. And if that kind of thing happens and you have built up this network of shared meaning, you'll be much more resilient in going through that conflict. If you haven't done this, this can be very damaging to the relationship. So, key insights. Relationships are built, not found. So one of the ideas in pop culture is that you're looking for Mr. or Mrs. Right, that you're just going to find the perfect person and everything will be wonderful. That's highly unlikely. Very often opposites attract, and you'll end up in a relationship with differences and things that will grind between the two of you in relationship. So to build a strong relationship, it takes intentional, ongoing actions and attitudes that you will do. Positive habits create resilience. Small, everyday behaviors, turning toward, expressing affection, outsize the effects of other things in the long term. Emotion is central. So we need emotional connection, not just conflict resolution. So this is the core of Gottman's approach. So when you go down to the bottom and we're talking about love maps, we're trying to build a sense of connection and sharing of emotion together. And there's lots of strategies and skills that can be used for this. So the Sound Relationship House offers a layered, research-backed roadmap for building lasting love. And Gottman will very often host seminars for couples. He's done this for like 40 years. I don't know if he's still doing it because he's getting older. But they would have couples come in who were experiencing distress, and more than 90% of the time, when they used these strategies and activities, they were able to turn the relationship around and build a positive relationship. So again, we're trying to build trust, commitment, emotional responsiveness, and intentional connection between the couple. And again, this session is just an overview. As you go through the next 4 sessions, we're going to go into much more depth on the behaviors and strategies that we could use to work on this. Well, thank you for joining us for our first session, and I hope that you'll join us for the following sessions.